All right, picture this scenario in as much vivid, expanded detail as you can imagine. You step off a long flight back from London, your legs stiff, the dry desert air hitting your lungs in a way that reminds you how different life is in Arizona compared to the damp chill of the UK. You're expecting to see the sprawling, peaceful acreage your beloved aunt left you, those 50 acres she always talked about with pride, dotted with wildflowers and anchored by a huge oak tree that stood sentinel near the old dirt driveway. Aunt Margaret's property was a place you'd visited countless times as a kid. You still remember stepping off the porch into a field of color local birds fluttering around, and how in the distance you could see the haze of heat dancing on the horizon. It was an unassuming piece of land, remote and quiet, but bursting with the energy of the desert. The cacti, the sage, the occasional scorpion. If you flipped over a rock, these were all a cherished part of your aunt's everyday existence. You return now feeling a twinge of excitement, maybe even nostalgia, as the Uber driver navigates roads that look newer than you recall. You lean forward, peering at each intersection, half anticipating that dusty old sign your aunt used to joke about, the one marking the boundary of her property. Yet as you get closer, the driver, a friendly middle-aged guy with a southwestern accent, slows down unexpectedly. He keeps checking the GPS and glancing at you in the rearview mirror like he's about to deliver some unsettling news. Then you see it row after row of nearly identical beige houses stretching out in the desert sun with manicured lawns in the desert of all things, and uniform mailboxes that look like they came from the same glossy catalog. Even from the backseat of the car you can sense something is massively off. You murmur to yourself that there's no way these houses could be on your aunt's property. She had left it in her will precisely because it was undeveloped, a piece of the desert she cherished. But here you are, confronted with a brand new community so carefully orchestrated it feels like you've walked onto a model set. The driver, just as confused as you, eventually slows to a stop in front of a massive sign that declares in fancy gold lettering, Emerald Heights Phase 1. The sign is framed by meticulously trimmed shrubs, and maybe even a small fountain that softly gurgles in the background. It's surreal. The driver chuckles, half nervous, and says, "Sir, I think maybe the GPS got it wrong. This is definitely a housing development. Are you sure this is the right address?" You stare, your heart sinking, and realize it's not just a development. It's an entire neighborhood of brand new dwellings that apparently sprouted like mushrooms in the desert after a rainstorm. You pay the driver, your mind racing with thoughts of how in the world this could have happened, and you grab your suitcase from the trunk. The air feels hotter than usual, or maybe that's just your blood pressure rising. You wander over to a sleek, modern sales office that stands at the entrance, something you imagine belongs in a high-end suburb, not on what used to be the dusty approach to your aunt's land. The glass doors slide open automatically, and inside you find a pristine reception area with tasteful minimalist decor. The polished floors reflect overhead lights that seem too bright for your jet-lagged eyes. A tall, bright-eyed realtor named Brittany approaches you immediately, beaming a smile so polished it looks rehearsed. She's wearing a name tag that says Brittany Sales Associate. She asks, looking to purchase one of our Phase 2 properties. With the kind of perky enthusiasm you'd expect in a real estate commercial. Your mind practically short-circuits at the idea of a Phase 2, given you had zero inkling there was even a Phase 1. You manage to keep your composure and explain in the calmest tone you can muster that you're actually the rightful owner of this land and you have no clue how these houses exist. Brittany's practiced smile falters for a split second, like a glitch in a well-oiled machine, before she recovers and says something about how the HOA president, Melanie Ross, can clarify any confusion. She's apparently been anticipating your arrival. That's your second red flag. Clearly they already know who you are. You follow Brittany's directions through a row of immaculate model homes, noticing as you go the precise uniformity of roof tiles, the carefully placed desert-friendly plants, and the occasional security camera perched at corners blinking red like watchful eyes. You see people walking dogs on short leashes, a few children riding bikes, but each resident you pass gives you a wary look as though sensing you don't belong. It's an unsettling feeling here on what's supposed to be your land. Eventually you reach the development's administrative building. It's bigger and fancier than anything you'd expect for a typical HOA. As you step inside, the cold blast of air conditioning hits your face, and you notice the lobby has sleek glass walls, polished floors, and abstract art that probably cost a small fortune. A receptionist points you to an elevator that whisks you up to the second floor, where a corridor leads to an office with a frosted glass door reading Melanie Ross, HOA President. Inside that office is where the real shock sets in. Melanie Ross, a blonde woman in her early 50s, sits behind a massive mahogany desk that'd look more fitting for a Fortune 500 CEO. She's impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her hair styled to perfection, and she greets you with a practiced warmth that barely conceals something predatory behind her eyes. The space is dotted with awards on the walls, community service plaques, photos of her smiling next to local politicians. You can't help but recall the unscrupulous CEOs you've encountered in your career as a forensic accountant. That same quietly steeled confidence emanates from her, as though she's used to having things go her way. She calls you by name, slides a thick folder across the desk, and explains that they've sent you multiple notices about a development arrangement. Then she flips through legal documents with carefully placed sticky tabs. She points out how your aunt supposedly signed some agreement with the brand new Emerald Heights HOA in 1998, giving them broad rights to modify and develop the property if the owner failed to respond. She claims they followed every letter of the agreement, sending official communications to the address on file, which happened to be your aunt's old house, demolished 2 years prior. She shrugs like this is the most normal thing in the world and half apologizes that you neglected to update your contact information, which effectively means it's your fault if you didn't see the notices. Then she hits you with a final sweetener, offering you some meager compensation to sign away your claims. It's infuriating, but you've spent enough years chasing down white-collar criminals to know better than to show your anger. You keep a steady face, tell her you'll talk to your lawyer and walk out, your mind reeling with the realization that these people took over your land so systematically that it's practically bulletproof from a casual challenge. Leaving the building, you pass the very spot where your aunt's favorite oak tree once stood. A tree you remember climbing as a kid, feeling the rough bark under your palms. Now it's replaced by a glossy fountain complete with a statue of a desert flower or maybe some abstract shape and a ring of benches that look like they were just installed. The sight is enough to make your stomach drop. That night you shack up in a modest nearby hotel, some chain place off the highway. Open your laptop and do what you do best. You follow the paper trail. Within hours, you stumble on something that confirms your suspicions. Melanie Ross had once been a lawyer. Yes, but her license was suspended for fraud, dishonesty, misrepresentation. So she reinvented herself as an HOA president, presumably where oversight is less intense. You keep digging through county records, searching for how exactly the property deed changed hands or what fancy legal footwork was used to claim your aunt's land. Around 3 a.m., with your eyes burning from the motel's harsh lamp, your phone buzzes. A text from an unknown number says, "If you want the real story, meet me at Java Junction tomorrow at 10 a.m. A friend. You'd usually be wary of random messages from unknown senders, but given the bizarre nature of what you've uncovered, you decide it's worth investigating. You shoot back a quick, "Sure," then keep digging into records until you can't focus anymore. By that point, you've discovered at least 15 other properties in the last 5 years that mysteriously ended up in the hands of the Emerald Heights HOA. The pattern is identical. Absentee owners, outdated addresses, 0 responses to official notices, and a subsequent land grab. It's more elaborate than anything you've ever seen in your career. The next morning you show up at Java Junction, a small, cozy place that smells of roasted beans and pastries, far enough from Emerald Heights that you suspect it's out of their surveillance range. The place is busy with locals who chat about everyday life while you scan the tables for someone who might be that friend. A woman in a crisp navy suit, about 30 years old, walks in looking a bit nervous. She spots you, approaches, and quietly says, "Brian Jordan." You nod. She introduces herself as Allison West. Up close you see dark circles under her eyes, like she hasn't been sleeping well. Her hand shakes slightly as she sets down a slim briefcase. She explains she once worked for Melanie Ross, fresh out of law school, thinking she'd landed a top-tier mentor who was brilliant in real estate deals. But about 6 months into the job, she found out just how big of a con artist Melanie was. She whips out a folder of documents, emails, and ledger sheets, letting you see the whole operation from the inside. Turns out the Emerald Heights HOA is less of a genuine homeowners association and more of a property acquisition machine. Melanie systematically identifies lands with owners who are elderly, absent, or out of state, especially heirs who might not be paying attention. They then exploit obscure bylaws that let them annex land if the owners don't respond to official notices. With a few well-placed missing letters or invalid addresses, it looks as though no one contested. Then they partner with a shady developer named Jim the Hammer Harrison, who's notorious for ignoring environmental regs and flipping houses fast. By the time the rightful owners catch on, the HOA has minted huge profits, sold homes to unsuspecting families, and left behind a labyrinth of paperwork that's nearly impossible to unravel. Allison says she tried to blow the whistle. She confronted Melanie, who basically laughed in her face, told her this was how real business is done. Then Allison was blacklisted from every law firm in the region, threatened by random calls telling her to keep quiet, and basically forced to keep her head down, living in fear. She found out your Aunt Margaret was on to them years ago. Your aunt had documents from environmental agencies indicating the land needed significant cleanup before any building should happen. The developer apparently paid off or intimidated inspectors to sign off. Even more shocking, Allison reveals that right before your aunt died, she left instructions for you to look under the old oak tree where she'd buried crucial records, everything from surveys to sketches of how the developer planned to eventually sell the mineral rights for tens of millions. By now, your anger is almost a physical weight on your chest, but there's also a fierce sense of purpose. Aunt Margaret must have known that you, with your forensic accounting background, would piece it together if given the chance. Allison confesses that the ring extends into local government, possibly even a federal judge or a senator. She's seen names and emails that connect to big political donors. It's a bigger beast than either of you anticipated. You realize you need a plan. You propose a multi-step approach. Gather enough irrefutable evidence to bury them, then get them to incriminate themselves. Allison offers to crawl back to Melanie, pretending to be contrite that she wants a second chance. Meanwhile, you'll show up at the next big HOA meeting playing the clueless heir who might fold for a quick buck. The goal is to lull Melanie into that sweet spot of overconfidence. In your experience, that's when criminals slip. So a week later, you find yourself stepping into a lavish community center in Emerald Heights, a building that looks more suited to an upscale resort than a neighborhood meeting space. The floors are polished marble, the lighting is impeccable, and there's a stage at the front with a podium. About 100 new homeowners fill the rows, some flipping through pamphlets, others whispering about rumors they've heard. Melanie is at the front wearing a power suit, greeting people with the sort of gracious smile that masks iron-fisted control. At her side is a burly man in his 50s with a deep tan, Jim Harrison presumably. She calls the meeting to order. There's some standard HOA business about landscaping monthly dues and a new community pool they plan to install. Then she shifts gears, pointing you out, telling everyone there's a situation with a man named Brian Jordan who believes he has a claim on their homes. She plays it like you're the big bad wolf threatening their rightful property. You stand up heart-pounding, but you keep your voice soft, explaining that you discovered these houses on land your aunt left you and you're not out to hurt families. You just want fair treatment. Melanie seizes the moment, stating, "We all sympathize, but we have the legal documentation. We're even willing to offer him some compensation." She glances at Jim, who chuckles and says they're prepared to pay you $200,000 to settle this. It's insulting, but you feign indecision as though you're too overwhelmed to fight them. A wave of tension ripples through the homeowners. Some glare at you, worried about losing their property, while others seem uneasy about how Melanie is controlling the narrative. After that meeting, you leave quickly, letting them assume you're unsure. But behind the scenes, Allison is capturing every word that Melanie says, especially the part where Melanie brags about how she targeted your aunt's address, knowing it was defunct, or mentions how a powerful senator might intervene if things get too hot. It's damning evidence. Meanwhile, a few residents approach you quietly, whispering that their closings were oddly rushed, that notaries never showed up in person, that they were told to sign stacks of documents in a single afternoon. You gather these anecdotes like precious gems. Allison does more digging, discovering an email referencing something called Project Clean Sweep, which details a future plan to condemn the original section of Emerald Heights for environmental hazards. The orchard your aunt loved would be labeled unfit due to contamination from hasty construction. Then the HOA would force buyouts at bargain prices, clearing the way for a luxury resort or a golf course. The more you hear, the more monstrous it gets. These people are playing chess with residents' lives, ignoring toxic soil issues just to make a fast profit and planning to displace families once the moment is right. You decide to contact an old friend at the FBI agent David Chen, who helped you crack a corporate embezzlement case in Chicago. He tells you they've had an eye on Jim Harrison for possible money laundering but lacked the final puzzle pieces. Now with your evidence, they can see a path to nailing him and maybe Melanie and the whole corrupt network too. The FBI suggests you gather even more concrete proof, maybe lure Melanie into a direct admission. Allison sets up a scenario where she tells Melanie she can convince Brian Jordan you to accept a cheap payout. You'll pretend to be in dire need of money, so you'll settle quietly. The FBI will watch from a distance, ready to move in if it looks like you can get a direct confession. Then Jim Harrison, suspicious by nature, decides to corner Allison in the HOA office late one night, physically grabbing her arm, demanding her phone. He's raging about how they've handled bigger obstacles and how the senator will bury you if you keep pushing. Allison, terrified, still manages to record it all. She escapes, passes the audio to you and the FBI. The next day, Harrison tries to flee the state with a bag of HOA funds, or so the rumor goes. The FBI snags him at the state border with a fake passport, and he folds like a cheap tent, volunteering to testify that Melanie orchestrated everything. Panicking, Melanie tries to speed sell the remaining homes, forging notary stamps, pushing closings through in 72 hours, figuring no judge would yank property from so many innocent third-party buyers. But in her haste, she leaves a trail of sloppy documents that the FBI can use as evidence of fraud. One of her lawyers then files an emergency motion in court claiming you're harassing the community with false accusations. But in their rush, they attach bank documents that actually validate your money laundering suspicions. The presiding judge, Patricia Reeves, a famously tough judge on property crimes, calls them out, basically saying they've just put incriminating evidence on the public record. Melanie's legal team tries to withdraw the documents, but it's too late. You keep building your case, coordinating with the FBI. You get sworn statements from half the city council who confess that Melanie and Jim twisted their arms into approving permits. Word leaks that Senator William Thornton got generous campaign donations from shell companies linked to Jim Harrison. The net tightens. Everyone can feel the walls closing in, but you want that final nail in the coffin. So you call Melanie, telling her you'll drop your claims if she pays hush money. You're certain she'll do it because she has everything to lose if you go public. She agrees to meet in an abandoned warehouse on Route 47, the kind of place where shady deals go down in old gangster movies. She insists no lawyers, no media, and definitely no feds. That night you arrive early, wearing the best wire the FBI could provide, a small device that can broadcast through concrete walls. The place is dark, lit only by a few flickering overhead fluorescents. You wait, heart-pounding, until you see headlights approach. Melanie steps out of a black SUV with two hulking bodyguards, each looking like they bench press small cars for fun. She dumps a duffel bag on the ground, unzips it just enough for you to see bricks of $100 bills. She claims it's $8 million. She demands you sign an NDA, take the money, and vanish. You start flipping through the bundles, let out a sarcastic laugh, maybe hint that you know more than she thinks, referencing other people who had problems with her. She loses her temper, spouting that they removed bigger obstacles in the past, that they're unstoppable. One bodyguard reaches under his jacket. Boom. That's the moment the FBI bursts in with Kevlar vests and guns, shouting for everyone to freeze. Melanie screams that you're a traitor, that she trusted you to settle. The FBI cuffs her, photographs the bag of illicit HOA money, and reads them their rights. Within days, Harrison's plea deal is in place. He spills the beans on everything from bribery to forging signatures. He even reveals how Senator Thornton gave them political cover. Over 200 people across multiple states end up facing charges, resignations sweep through local government, and the media jumps on the story of the biggest HOA scam in the Southwest. But your main focus is on the 120 families who now fear losing their homes. You devise a settlement, letting them keep their houses for what they originally paid, minus any inflated fees. That money funds environmental cleanup of the land. The actual criminals, especially Melanie, will be the ones paying the real price: long prison sentences and forfeiture of assets. Melanie tries to play the victim at her preliminary hearing, crying that she was entrapped. The prosecutors calmly present the wire recordings, the threatening emails, the bank logs linking HOA accounts to offshore shells. The judge sees right through her. She gets 25 years in federal prison. Jim Harrison gets 15. Senator Thornton gets indicted, his political career torpedoed. In the meantime, your aunt's property transforms into something part suburban neighborhood, part living tribute to Aunt Margaret's passion for open land. A new legitimate HOA is formed with real transparency rules, actual elections, and an open forum for residents. They name a little garden area after your aunt planting wildflowers in the same patch where she once roamed with her wide-brimmed hat. The orchard, which once had that majestic oak, is preserved as a community gathering spot instead of a future resort site. Then you learn the land is also sitting on a significant gas deposit that Melanie had secretly planned to sell to an energy company for around $50 million. Instead, after negotiations with local authorities and environmental experts, you create a trust so any future gas revenue must be used for schools, infrastructure, and environmental safeguards. It's ironically exactly the opposite of Melanie's get-rich-quick plan. The families in that development now feel a sense of relief. They can trust their property titles. The system that scammed them is dismantled. Your Aunt Margaret in a way orchestrated it all. She recognized the threat, left you the property, and counted on your investigative grit. You stand one evening in the orchard, the newly planted wildflowers rustling in the breeze, and you can't help but think that if she were here, she'd probably have a wry smile saying, "I knew you'd figure it out." The state legislature even passes new legislation in the wake of the scandal dubbed the Jordan Amendment, mandating a triple-verified process for official HOA notices, closing the loophole that allowed them to send mail to demolished addresses. In the final court hearing, you watch the families line up to share statements of how they almost lost everything if you hadn't shown up. Judges, city council members, and even the senator's staffers are implicated. It's a massive cleanup of corruption, all triggered by your aunt's foresight and your unwavering push for the truth. Now, if you're listening to this, maybe you've got an HOA that's tried to bully you with insane fees, or told you your mailbox color is non-compliant, or maybe you suspect something bigger, a property scheme that doesn't smell right. Let me tell you, keep every scrap of paper record, every conversation, if it's legal question, every official notice. You don't have to accept that these organizations are untouchable monoliths. Fraud relies on intimidation and ignorance. Once you shine a bright enough light, the roaches scatter. This story proves that, if you gather the right allies, do the research, and refuse to roll over, you can topple even the most confident con artists. On the day of Melanie's sentencing, she tried to give a final statement about how she let greed cloud her judgment, how she'd regret it for the rest of her life. Maybe she meant it. Maybe it was an act. Either way, the gavel fell and she was off to federal prison for a couple of decades. The press was all over it, calling her the ultimate HOA tyrant, running photos of her in handcuffs. Meanwhile, the actual families of Emerald Heights got some closure. Many of them banded together in a real sense of community, planting new wildflowers on a patch of land we designated as a small public park. One weekend, a group of them invited me to watch them put in a memorial bench under a transplanted oak sapling, a symbolic nod to my aunt's original tree. I stood there wiping sweat from my brow, thinking I could almost hear Aunt Margaret whisper, "Well done, kid. This is what I wanted." So that's the story expanded in full detail. They tried to bury me, to bury my aunt's wishes in a mountain of legal threats. They banked on me being some naive sap who'd sign a piece of paper for a quick buck or give up at the sight of high-priced attorneys. But they overlooked the fact that I've spent 15 years dissecting fraudulent paperwork for a living. That's the beauty of forensic accounting. Once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them. You know exactly where to look, which rock to turn over. Each forged signature, each laundered dollar, each memo referencing hidden deals, they all lead to the next clue until the entire tower collapses on the perpetrators. If you've got your own story of HOA nightmares or shady property battles, drop it below. Because the more people share these tales, the more we all learn how to defend ourselves. This is a war that's fought with knowledge, strategy, and enough grit to stand firm when they intimidate you with big words and bigger lawyers. And if you found this saga worth listening to, do me a favor, like, subscribe, or pass it along to someone else who might be in the crosshairs of a corrupt HOA. We can't let them hide behind fancy suits and labyrinthine bylaws. We have to shine that spotlight far and wide. Now, as you imagine the final scene, you can almost see me standing amidst the newly cleaned up land. Families in the background are barbecuing, kids laughing, the orchard partially intact with a plaque dedicated to Aunt Margaret. The air still sizzles in the Arizona heat, but it feels refreshing now, not suffocating. In one corner of the property, a modest sign indicates the area set aside for environmental research. The local high school might get funding from those mineral rights if and when they're tapped responsibly. There's talk of scholarships for kids from low-income backgrounds, courtesy of the trust you established. It's a grand twist of fate. The criminals tried to exploit the land for private gain, but ended up fueling a public good. Officials from neighboring counties have come by to see how the new legitimate HOA is structured. They want to replicate the transparency rules. Meanwhile, Allison West, newly minted hero in the local legal scene, has become known for taking on corrupt property managers statewide. She's unstoppable, a living testament to what happens when you gather enough evidence and stand up to the powerful. She's told you a dozen times how your aunt was the one who believed in her back in law school, urging her to always read the footnotes and question every assumption. You might wonder if the senator ever faced real justice. After all, powerful politicians often wriggle out of tight spots. But in this case, thanks to the avalanche of documents from Jim Harrison, the senator's ties to illicit donations and manipulations of zoning boards were plastered across the media. The Senate Ethics Committee launched an investigation which led to indictments, and while he tried every trick in the book, crying partisan witch hunt, claiming ignorance, it all fell flat under the weight of evidence. He ended up resigning in disgrace and faced his own trial for corruption. In that sense, it was a chain reaction. The wedge you drove into Emerald Heights forced open a crack that led all the way up to federal politics. Some nights you still dream about that oak tree, how it used to cast a long shade across the dusty yard. How Aunt Margaret once pointed out the circles in its trunk to explain how old it was. You recall the stories she told you as a kid about how local tribes once roamed that desert, how the land wasn't just a commodity but a piece of heritage. Maybe that's why she was so determined to keep it out of the hands of vultures like Melanie Ross. She must have seen them circling for years, just waiting for her to pass away and for no one to show up to fight. But she set the stage so that if you did show up, you'd have enough breadcrumbs to follow enough leads to expose the entire scam. In a sense, your aunt was the original whistleblower. And so, as you stand there, you think about how ironically perfect it is that your aunt's cunning was the downfall of this entire fraud ring. They tried to be cunning themselves, forging signatures, mailing notices to vacant addresses, forging building permits, forging entire communities, all built on lies. But once confronted with real evidence, real perseverance, they crumbled. In the end, the truth was bigger than their labyrinth of legalese. By the time all the court cases wrap up, Emerald Heights has become a local symbol, but not in the way Melanie planned. Instead of representing some glitzy suburban paradise, it's a testament to how a community once awakened to the truth can band together to set things right. The families once suspicious of each other now share a bond from surviving a near disaster that threatened their homes. They hold monthly potlucks, open forums to discuss HOA issues, and they made sure that no single individual can ever again hijack the association for personal gain. The orchard stands as a reminder of what was almost lost and what was ultimately reclaimed. And so that's the long, winding, expanded story of how a brazen scheme to steal land turned into a cautionary tale for HOAs everywhere. They tried to bury me and my aunt's legacy under a mountain of legal threats. They forgot that I'd spent 15 years dissecting fraudulent deals, flipping shady transactions on their heads. They also forgot how unstoppable an outraged community can be once it sees the truths. People often think fighting these big fraud machines is hopeless. But once a single shaft of light hits the darkness, everything changes. It just takes the right combination of timing, evidence, and determination. So yes, if you've made it this far, I invite you again, drop your city in the comments. Let me know about your own HOA horror stories or property nightmares. Because the more we talk, the more we connect, the less space these scammers have to operate. If you found any piece of this story compelling, share it with a friend who might be dealing with something similar. Because shining that spotlight is the best defense we have against roaches who scuttle around in the shadows. And that's it in all its expanded detail, from the moment I arrived in the desert to the final day of sentencing. They tried to drown me in legalities, but they overlooked the fact that once you understand how to sift through documents and trace transactions, you can take them down from within. Aunt Margaret would be proud. Her land remains a testament to honesty and community. The orchard is still there with new saplings in place of the old oak and a plaque that quietly reads, "In loving memory of Margaret Jordan, who knew the desert's true worth." Sometimes I swear I can still hear her voice on the wind saying, "Keep that spotlight blazing, kid. Don't let them steal what's yours."